Hello and welcome to the Joe Ligato Show. I'm your host, Dr. Joe Ligato, and today we're going to be talking about China's semiconductor chip production, which I think is a pretty big deal because it's important for all technologies, or I should say most technologies, that are really cutting edge today to have the best and smallest semiconductor chips. And so we see here a article from the South China Morning Post on how China is stockpiling ASML chips, chip-making machines, which push imports past 2023 estimates. And so this ASML is a Dutch company, and China has done its best to acquire as much of this technology as it can from ASML. And we see here that China's imports of Dutch lithography machines have surged this year, with the first 7 months already surpassing ASML Holdings' previous forecast for 2023 sales to China. So China is really trying to stockpile as much of this as possible. Let's see. In July, China imported 626 million worth of lithography machines from the Netherlands. And I always say that Netherlands and ASML is really the one company that United States probably has more leverage on than China is able to bring to bear there, because of the fact that it is in Europe and China just does not have as much influence there. Whereas other companies, such as in Taiwan, in Japan, in South Korea, that might be doing things, innovating, might have certain technology around semiconductor chips, China is able to influence them to a pretty high degree because they are in China's sphere of influence. Now, some of their national foreign policy might be in the hands of the United States, but in terms of their technological secrets, I believe China has a decent amount of access to those. There's some very advanced 2 nanometer and smaller chips that Taiwan has direct access to. They're able to produce and no one else is, that China really wishes it could have complete control over, and it's just not been able to yet. But once Taiwan is likely going to be absorbed by China, they will have access to that. And that's why the United States is trying so hard to make sure that Taiwan stays separate from China. Okay, so back to Netherlands and ASML. ASML has a near monopoly of the world's most advanced lithography machines. And one thing that they're doing is they're trying to make them small enough, the lithography machines, in order to be able to transport them to other countries. Whereas China, and we'll see this in other articles as well, China doesn't really care about making them small enough to trade with others. They actually want to keep all the lithography machines for themselves. And so they could have building size lithography machines in order to mass produce the types of chips that they want. So under U.S. pressure, the company ASML has cut off exports of its extreme ultraviolet EUV lithography systems to China. The company has until now been able to continue shipments of less advanced DUV, deep ultraviolet lithography systems to the country, but that is expected to soon change. So China is stockpiling the less advanced ones, but they have not been able to get their hands on as many of the EUVs. Okay, so there's heavy demand from China on the semiconductors. However, they're not able to access some of these chips due to American sanctions, which for the most part has not been working. It's slowed down China in some regards in terms of the production of various equipment. However, it also pushes China to innovate and become more sovereign, more independent, more autonomous by creating its own domestic versions of things, or making sure that these various parts of the supply chain related to semiconductors are within the hands of very close allies of their own, such as Russia. Okay, anything else of interest in this article? Chinese media at the same time have played out the possibility that the country could deliver its first homegrown lithography machine capable of producing 28 nanometer chips by the end of this year. Well, the thing is, they've already shown, this was an article from a couple months ago now, but they've already shown that they're able to produce, I believe it was cell phones that have 7 nanometer chips in them. And so they have some way of mass producing these more cutting edge chips. It might have been the case that they already stockpiled the more advanced lithography machines from before the sanctions occurred, which means they are very forward looking, they're very forward thinking. But I do think that this is going to be something that the United States and China are going to be fighting over for quite a long time. And so I have 5 main takeaways that I think we should go over in regards to semiconductor chips related to this article. So China's semiconductor industry is a matter of self-reliance. It does want to make sure that the United States cannot just influence it. It cannot just completely break off its advances, its technological advances, because of some critical technologies, such as semiconductor chips, that the United States has leverage over within the supply chain. And so China is, as much as possible, stockpiling these lithography machines, and they're figuring out how to reverse engineer them, as well as create other methods of mass producing these semiconductor chips that they need. And this should be taken in the broader context of understanding that China is being watched by other various powerful nations that are, I guess we could call them regional powers, because I don't think there's any others that could be considered superpowers. China is a near peer or peer competitor to the United States. Russia might be up there, but its economy is just so tiny. It's really hard. Even though they're definitely punching above their weight class, it's hard to consider them a peer. So I'm just going to say regional powers within the world are looking at what's happening to China and saying, well, we have to become autonomous. We have to be a sovereign enough nation that the United States can't do this to us as well. So that could mean a number of different things. It could mean that these other countries try to build their own domestic production of these things, or they could say, we can't do that. We're too small of a nation. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to focus on making sure that we have access to China's alternative international economy, alternative semiconductor chip making, in case the United States continues to use economic sanctions against other countries. The next major point I'd like to make is on the US-China trade tensions and the various export controls. That's not going to go away. The trade war is just going to be heating up for the next few years until it becomes a hot war. It seems like China is very much expecting a hot war, but until that point, they are expecting that the United States is going to continue to try to sanction China as much as possible. And China is recognizing this and figuring out ways to become as independent as possible from the United States-led supply chain. And so there's also the other trade tensions that have arisen around other technologies and how China is figuring out ways to innovate around that, the other sanctions being put on them. And China is, in a lot of ways, already ahead in terms of the most cutting edge things in, say, material science. When you're looking at things like hypersonic weapons, various solar power, electric vehicles, autonomous vehicles, all of that stuff, China is doing very, very, very well in. And so it might seem like, from an American perspective or a Western perspective, that China is just taking all these sanctions and they're not putting on their own sanctions, but they actually have a ton of technology that the United States would love to get its hands on, and it's just not been able to. And aside from that, I've heard very recently that China has started to sanction the United States from getting access to things like rare earth materials, rare earth metals, which are very important for the production of these advanced technologies. And so China has various ways it can retaliate in this trade war. Some other geopolitical implications of this, and I've talked about this already, is that nations are starting to recognize they cannot have their supply chain be beholden on the United States. They cannot be dependent on the United States. And this also shows China's moves to have a Belt and Road Initiative to be very important and very prophetic, we could say, because the United States is trying as much as possible to blockade them by flipping various nations around China, such as India, such as Taiwan, which is not a nation, it's a province, such as South Korea, such as Japan, such as the Philippines, where I'm located. And so China has these alternative mechanisms for supporting its supply chain that are land-based instead of sea-based, in case the United States actually is able to halt its sea-based trade. So this trade war is multifaceted. It's not only about the technology, but also how can you transport things into various locations. It's worth touching upon as well the role of the Netherlands, where that lithography machines, the fact that they have a near monopoly on the creation of them, really makes them an important country here, where you wouldn't typically think of the Netherlands as being important anymore. And so the fact that China might be able to break this monopoly, it really could change the supply chain in ways that are difficult to comprehend in modern times, because you really had to play ball with the United States if you wanted to have access to these lithography machines. And so it's anyone's guess about how hostile powers will be towards the United States when other countries have access to the creation of lithography machines that can be purchased instead of having to go through the puppet of the United States, ASML. And finally, China's semiconductor technological advances are not going to stop. And it's really impressive just how far ahead they are from what people expected, from what various analysts expected. They are, I would say, a decade ahead of expectations based off of what was said in this article, what was said in other articles I've been reading on the topic. China has been preparing for the semiconductor trade war and the trade war more broadly since, I would probably say, the early 2010s. Really after the last financial crisis of 2007, 2008, I think China really recognized that it had to decouple from the United States, which was making a lot of mistakes and then pushing the consequences downstream in the international economy, which meant that other countries suffered because of the mistakes of the United States, which we saw in the last financial crisis. And so this push for self-sufficiency, for autonomy, should be a wake-up call for other nations. So if you found this article to be informative, to be interesting, please let me know. Please give me a thumbs up. It helps me in the algorithm on both YouTube and Rumble. Please leave a comment in the comment box. Any questions, concerns, critiques. Please subscribe to our channel on YouTube and Rumble. We are trying to pivot as much as possible away from YouTube. They are a censorship platform. We are more interested in Rumble, which seems to allow more free speech. It has fewer taboo topics, and we love to be able to talk about everything freely and openly on this channel. So if you found this video to be informative, please give us a thumbs up, as I mentioned before. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Bye.